The 7 levels of horror movies. Level 1, Trash. The Happening, 2008. When The Happening hit theaters, audiences expected another twist-filled thriller from M. Night Shyamalan, the director who had once redefined supernatural storytelling. Instead, they watched humanity crumble under the wrath of plants. The story followed an unexplained wave of mass suicides spreading across cities and towns. People froze mid-sentence, dropped their tools, and calmly walked into death. The culprit, as it turned out, was nature itself releasing toxins through the air. What should have been a chilling revelation became a global punchline. Mark Wahlberg's soft-spoken science teacher wandered through the apocalypse asking trees for answers, while Zooey Deschanel's blank stares carried the emotional weight of a paper bag. Viewers sat in disbelief as serious dialogue turned unintentionally comic. Lines like,
"What? No!"
echoed in meme history. The film's tone never found footing. Moments of supposed dread clashed with childlike curiosity. Shyamalan later claimed he aimed for a tongue-in-cheek B-movie homage, though most critics read it as unintentional comedy. Behind the awkward line readings and hollow tension, The Happening became a textbook example of misplaced sincerity. A blockbuster meant to terrify ended up redefining deadpan disaster. Birdemic. Shock and Terror, 2010. 2 years later, Birdemic arrived like a broken prophecy of low-budget ambition. Director James Nguyen, a self-taught filmmaker and tech salesman, wanted to make a love story inspired by the birds and an inconvenient truth. What emerged was a cinematic glitch. Shot on home video cameras for roughly $10,000, the film stitched together romance, climate change warnings, and CGI eagles that flapped in place like cursed gifts. The editing jumped without rhythm. Dialogue vanished mid-scene, and gunfire sounded like keyboard clicks. Entire sequences featured characters silently driving or walking for minutes at a time, as if the movie itself had fallen asleep. Yet Nguyen's unshakable conviction gave Birdemic its cult immortality. He promoted it by parking a van outside Sundance with hand-drawn posters and speakers blasting bird sounds. Word spread fast. Midnight audiences began treating it like interactive theater, shouting lines, waving toy hangers, and cheering every continuity error. What started as a warning about global warming evolved into a shared comedy ritual. Nguyen never achieved his Hitchcock dream. Level 2, Cheap. The Bye-Bye Man, 2017. By the late 2000s, studios had discovered a formula that guaranteed short-term profits. A catchy title, a cursed phrase, and an endless stream of jump scares. The Bye-Bye Man fit that pattern perfectly. The film opened with promise, a mysterious name that should never be spoken. But what followed felt like a horror movie stitched together from every discarded idea in the genre. The story revolved around college students who unknowingly unleashed a supernatural killer by repeating his name. Once invoked, the entity haunted them through hallucinations and paranoia, though the logic behind his powers shifted scene by scene. Director Stacy Title used every tool in the low-budget horror playbook: flickering lights, dream fake-outs, mirror reveals, and loud sound cues that replaced actual suspense. Critics described it as a movie built entirely around the word boo. Doug Jones, usually known for his haunting physical performances, played the titular villain buried under makeup and CGI shadows. Yet despite his talent, the film never allowed him presence or menace. It constantly explained its own mythology through dialogue rather than mystery. Characters spoke in exposition, jumped at doors, and made decisions that defied reason. The result was a horror movie without fear, just noise and confusion. Still, the marketing worked. The poster, covered with the chilling line, "Don't think it, don't say it," spread across social media, and young audiences flocked to theaters. Truth or Dare, 2018. Produced by Blumhouse, it took a familiar party game and wrapped it in a supernatural curse. The setup was simple: say no to the game, and you die. The hook lay in the film's use of distorted smiles, faces twisting into digital grins whenever the curse struck. It was creepy once, maybe twice. Then it turned cartoonish. The movie followed a group of college friends whose secrets unraveled one dare at a time, though the emotional stakes felt secondary to the next jump scare. Director Jeff Wadlow leaned into bright lighting, glossy camera work, and fast pacing, more like a teen thriller than a descent into terror. Despite its flaws, the film captured the moment. Released during the peak of social media obsession, Truth or Dare mirrored the era's aesthetics. Filters, exaggerated reactions, and viral-like repetition. The haunted smile effect looked like a Snapchat filter gone wrong, which unintentionally made it memorable. Critics shredded it, calling it manipulative and soulless, but audiences made it a hit anyway. With a budget under $4 million, it earned over $100 million globally. For Blumhouse, that was validation. The studio had mastered the art of low-cost, high-return horror by targeting teens seeking quick adrenaline rather than slow dread. Level 3, Average. Friday the 13th, Part 3, 1982. By the early 80s, slashers had flooded theaters, each promising bloodier kills and bigger shocks. Friday the 13th, Part 3 rode that wave straight into gimmick territory. The studio wanted something to pull audiences back after the second film's lukewarm reaction, so they bet on 3D. Every stab, eyeball pop, and flying object was filmed with red and blue glasses in mind. On release, the technology barely worked, but the marketing did. Viewers lined up for the novelty, waving cardboard lenses as Jason Voorhees made his third rampage through Camp Crystal Lake. This installment gave Jason his trademark hockey mask, an accidental decision that changed horror iconography forever. The mask came from a spare prop lying around the effects department, yet it instantly defined the character. Beneath the new look, though, the film followed a checklist: teens partying, isolated cabins, slow chases, and inventive kills. Each death was designed as a 3D spectacle, arrows flying at the audience, harpoons bursting out of the screen. Critics dismissed it as empty shock value, but fans embraced its practical gore. Despite the recycled story, it delivered the kind of gruesome entertainment that turned Friday the 13th from a sequel chain into a cultural ritual. I Know What You Did last summer, 1997. It arrived during the post-Scream boom, when Hollywood rediscovered that fear sold better with good hair and pop soundtracks. The film opened with 4 friends covering up a hit-and-run accident on a coastal road, only to be hunted a year later by a mysterious figure with a hook. Its cast, Jennifer Love Hewitt, Sarah Michelle Gellar, Freddie Prinze Jr., and Ryan Phillippe, became instant teen idols, splashed across magazine covers before the movie even premiered. Director Jim Gillespie shot it like a sunlit nightmare. The beach town looked idyllic by day, haunted by night. The killer's slick raincoat and ice-cold weapon gave the story a fisherman's folklore edge, grounding its slasher roots in local legend. It moved fast, building tension through pacing rather than mystery. The scares were predictable, but the atmosphere carried it. The rooftop chase with Gellar remains one of the most striking sequences of the era. Pure cat-and-mouse panic, framed with unexpected craft. The film's success turned it into a late 90s staple, grossing over $100 million worldwide and spawning sequels that drained what originality remained. Still, its influence lingered. It captured a moment when horror wasn't underground or art house. It was prom night at the box office. For a generation raised on jump scares and neon horror posters, I Know What You Did last summer stood as the perfect definition of average done right. Neither groundbreaking nor disastrous, it proved that a familiar formula, delivered with energy and charisma, could still leave a mark. Level 4. Good mainstream horror. Scream, 1996. By the mid-90s, the slasher genre had grown stale. Endless sequels and faceless killers had drained the tension out of it. Scream hit theaters like a reset button. Directed by Wes Craven and written by Kevin Williamson, it revived horror by turning the camera back on the audience. The film opened with an instantly iconic sequence. Drew Barrymore, alone in her kitchen, popcorn burning, a phone call turning playful questions into a countdown to death. The shock of killing off a star within minutes jolted viewers back to attention. What made Scream work was its self-awareness. Characters openly discussed the rules of horror movies. Never say, "I'll be right back," never split up, never have sex, and then broke those rules anyway. Ghostface became a new kind of slasher icon, unpredictable and almost clumsy, switching between menace and panic in every chase. Craven's direction balanced humor with tension, using bright suburban settings instead of shadowy alleys. The dialogue felt modern, quick, and biting, mirroring the way teens actually talked. Its soundtrack, featuring alt-rock staples, gave the film a cultural fingerprint beyond the scares. Scream became a phenomenon. It grossed over $170 million worldwide, a massive haul for a genre that had been written off. The film's mix of comedy, meta-analysis, and genuine fear reignited Hollywood's interest in horror and launched a franchise that's still running decades later. Every masked killer, phone call prank, and self-referential scare that came afterward owed something to that first bloody phone call in Woodsboro. The Conjuring, 2013, based loosely on the case files of real-life paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. It drew inspiration from 70s haunted house classics, but wrapped them in modern precision. Set in 1971, It followed the Perrin family's move into a Rhode Island farmhouse where an unseen force terrorized them nightly. Wan focused on craftsmanship, long takes that followed characters through creaking hallways, shadows that lingered too long, and silence that stretched just enough to break nerves before a jump scare hit. Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga anchored the film with grounded performances that gave the supernatural chaos emotional weight. Their chemistry made the Warrens feel authentic, not sensational. The movie's scares came from rhythm rather than shock. Door knocks, clapping hands in the dark, voices under the floorboards. Wan used these details to restore old-fashioned tension to an audience that had grown numb to digital monsters. The success was staggering. The Conjuring earned over $300 million on a $20 million budget and launched an entire cinematic universe. Spin-offs like Annabelle and The Nun built empires out of a single haunting. Critics praised its restraint, calling it a rare studio horror film that respected its audience. Wan's direction combined technical polish with genuine dread, proving that mainstream horror could be both profitable and terrifying without cheap tricks. Level 5. Great horror with substance. Get Out, 2017. When Get Out premiered, it turned horror on its head. Jordan Peele, known until then for sketch comedy, wrote and directed a psychological thriller that forced audiences to confront racial anxiety through the language of terror. The film followed Chris, a black photographer meeting his white girlfriend's family for the first time. The suburban estate looked peaceful, but everything about it felt off. Smiles that lingered too long, compliments that cut like warnings, servants staring through hollow eyes. The tension built slowly, not through monsters or gore, but through social discomfort that bled into paranoia. The Sunken Place, a hypnotic void where Chris's consciousness floated helplessly while his body was controlled, became an instant cultural metaphor. It visualized the feeling of being silenced in plain sight. Peele wove in satire and dread with precision. Conversations about voting for Obama a third time, quiet microaggressions, and the eerie politeness of liberal racism. Every frame carried meaning, from the teacup stirring to the deer on the roadside. When the truth finally emerged, that the family transplanted white brains into black bodies, the film turned from suspense to nightmare without losing its grounded logic. Get Out became one of the decade's defining horror films. It won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay and earned Peele the first Best Picture nomination ever given to a debut horror director. Its $250 million global haul proved audiences wanted more than jump scares. They wanted ideas that lingered. It reshaped how horror could speak about society, turning fear into reflection. Hereditary, 2018. The film opened with a funeral and ended with a coronation of pure evil. Toni Collette's performance as Annie Graham, a grieving mother unraveling after tragedy, became the film's heartbeat. Astor constructed the story like a family drama that slowly collapsed into ritual horror. Scenes felt clinical and suffocating, the camera moving like a slow predator through miniature sets that mirrored Annie's dollhouse art. The story's descent from grief into occultism was merciless. Astor used silence and dread instead of jump scares. Moments like the dinner confrontation, where Annie screamed her pain into the void, or the shocking beheading sequence on the road, froze audiences in disbelief. The imagery was unforgettable. Shadows twitching in corners, figures crawling on ceilings, faces lit by candlelight that revealed too much. Hereditary divided audiences but earned critical acclaim. It pulled horror away from cheap catharsis and forced viewers to sit with grief, guilt, and the horror of family inheritance. For many, it marked the true arrival of elevated horror, stories that used terror as language for human collapse. Level 6. Masterpiece Horror. The Shining, 1980. When Stanley Kubrick released The Shining, audiences didn't know what to make of it. Stephen King's novel had already been a bestseller, but Kubrick stripped away most of its supernatural explanations and rebuilt it into something colder and more psychological. The film followed Jack Torrance, an aspiring writer who took a winter caretaker job at the remote Overlook Hotel with his wife and son. As snow sealed them inside, the hotel's ghosts began whispering through the walls, feeding on Jack's frustration until madness consumed him. Kubrick's direction turned horror into architecture. Every shot was designed for discomfort, hallways stretching too long, colors clashing unnaturally, and the Steadicam gliding like a ghost behind characters. The carpet patterns and mirror reflections became part of the storytelling, hinting at cycles of violence repeating endlessly within the hotel. Jack Nicholson's performance, unpredictable and volcanic, gave horror one of its most quoted moments. Here's Johnny. Shelley Duvall's terrified reactions weren't entirely acting. Kubrick's infamous perfectionism pushed her through over 100 takes of the same scene, leaving her exhausted and frayed. Critics at the time were divided, calling it too slow, too detached. Years later, it became a cornerstone of the genre, an exploration of isolation, obsession, and the thin border between sanity and evil. Every frame invited analysis. Fans still debate its hidden meanings, from Native American genocide to impossible architecture. The Exorcist, 1973. Based on William Peter Blatty's novel, it told the story of Regan, a young girl possessed by an ancient demon, and the priests who fought to save her. What set it apart was its realism. Friedkin treated the supernatural as documentary. Handheld cameras, natural lighting, and long stretches of silence before each eruption of chaos. When Regan's body twisted and her voice changed, the horror came from how ordinary everything around her felt. Behind the scenes, the production became a legend of its own. Actors were injured, sets burned down, and Friedkin fired guns on set to capture genuine fear. The film's premiere sparked fainting, vomiting, and emergency calls from theaters around the world. It wasn't marketing. Audiences had never seen religion portrayed with such raw terror. Max von Sydow and Jason Miller grounded the spectacle in human pain. One priest's guilt, another's loss of faith. The climactic exorcism, shot in freezing temperatures to capture visible breath, pushed horror to new levels of intensity. The film broke box office records, earned 10 Oscar nominations, and became the first horror film to be nominated for Best Picture. Its sound design, its quiet pacing, and its moral conflict turned it from shock entertainment into sacred terror. Every possession movie since has lived in its shadow. Psycho, 1960. The story began like a noir thriller. Marion Crane stealing money and fleeing town, before taking a brutal left turn halfway through. Her murder in the shower, edited from 70 camera angles in less than a minute, redefined what film could show. The scene's screeching violins and rapid cuts made violence psychological instead of graphic. Anthony Perkins delivered a hauntingly polite performance as Norman Bates, the motel owner whose nervous charm masked something deeply broken. Hitchcock's direction invited empathy, then weaponized it. The twist, that Norman's mother had been dead all along, shocked audiences and forced theaters to ban late entry so no one missed the reveal. Psycho changed horror forever. It dismantled storytelling structure, killed off its protagonist early, and made audiences fear the familiar instead of the monstrous. Critics initially called it exploitative. Now it stands as a masterclass in control and tension. Its influence runs through every slasher, every twist ending, and every quiet killer who smiles before the knife drops. Level 7, the Deity Tier. In 1979, when Alien premiered, it felt like horror had left Earth entirely. Ridley Scott fused science fiction with nightmare, creating a world that felt mechanical, claustrophobic, and disturbingly alive. The film followed the crew of the Nostromo, a mining ship that intercepted a mysterious distress signal on a barren planet. What they found there, the skeletal remains of an ancient creature and a cluster of eggs, became the foundation for one of cinema's most terrifying life forms. H.R. Giger's design of the xenomorph reshaped monster imagery forever. The creature's anatomy, part machine, part parasite, looked designed by something that understood fear on a molecular level. The slow reveal built unbearable tension, from the facehugger's first leap to the chestburster's eruption at the dinner table. That single scene, captured in one take with genuine actor-shock, became film legend. The ship's narrow corridors, industrial lighting, and persistent hum of machinery created a setting that felt more like a coffin than a vessel. Sigourney Weaver's Ripley emerged as one of the genre's most enduring protagonists, calm and calculating while everything around her disintegrated. The film's mix of realism and surreal design gave audiences something new: terror without fantasy, violence without relief. Alien became a blueprint for horror built on patience, sound, and space. It proved that the scariest thing in cinema wasn't the monster, it was waiting for it to appear. Jaws, 1975. 4 years before Alien, Steven Spielberg had already terrified the world with Jaws. The setup was simple, a great white shark terrorizing a small beach town, but the execution turned it into a cultural event. The malfunctioning mechanical shark forced Spielberg to hide the creature for most of the film, which accidentally made it scarier. The unseen threat, paired with John Williams' now legendary two-note score, kept audiences gripping their seats before the shark even appeared. Every scene was built on restraint. The floating barrels, the slow zoom on Chief Brody's horrified face, and the quiet moments on the boat before chaos erupted all created a rhythm that mimicked the ocean itself. Calm 1 second, violent the next. When the shark finally surfaced, it wasn't just a creature, it was inevitability. The movie shattered box office records and invented the concept of the summer blockbuster. Beaches saw attendance drop across America, and the great white shark became a symbol of primal fear. Spielberg's film used imagination and anticipation. The movie showed that horror could terrify the entire world with a single fin breaking the surface. The Silence of the Lambs, 1991. Directed by Jonathan Demme, it blurred the line between thriller and psychological terror. The story centered on Clarice Starling, an FBI trainee hunting a serial killer named Buffalo Bill with the help and manipulation of another, the imprisoned Hannibal Lecter. Anthony Hopkins' portrayal of Lecter became instantly iconic, every word sharpened like a blade. Demme's close-up framing forced audiences to confront faces head-on, creating intimacy that felt suffocating. The conversations between Clarice and Lecter were more frightening than most murder scenes, two minds dissecting each other piece by piece. Jodie Foster's quiet vulnerability gave the film emotional weight, turning Clarice into a rare kind of horror hero, driven not by fear, but by moral clarity. The film swept the Academy Awards, winning all 5 major categories: Best Picture, Director, Actor, Actress, and Screenplay. It became one of only 3 films in history to achieve that feat, and the first horror film ever to win Best Picture. Its precision, tension, and psychological realism elevated horror beyond genre. It became art. And that's it. Now to you, after half a century of reinvention, has horror finally reached perfection? Or is the scariest masterpiece still waiting to be made? Comment down below, leave a like, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell for more great videos like this one.